There is ultimately only one thing that separates the rich from the poor. It is actually how much you spend. What matters is how much you keep, not how much you earn. And that's why in this video, I'm gonna show you exactly how you should be spending your money to build wealth over the long term. I've worked with over 453 millionaires over 7 years in a top 5 finance company in the United States. With all of my experience, I've noticed several trends, patterns, and I've carefully noted what the specific steps were that these 453 millionaires took in order to build their wealth from day one. Most of these millionaires, I'd say about 98% of them, didn't inherit their wealth. They all did it from ground up. First, we're going to talk about monthly housing debt. So monthly housing debt really relates to everything when it comes to spending money on rent. That could be rent if you're actually renting an apartment. It could be your principal, your interest, your taxes, and your insurance if you're actually spending money on a house. It could also include your HOA fees, right? If you're living in a homeowners association, maybe you have a condo and you have to pay monthly or even quarterly HOA dues, that would also include your HOA fees. So how much should you be spending toward your housing debt? Now, what that means is anything you earn before taxes are taken out. So less than 28% should be going toward your housing expenses. So for example, if you make $100,000 a year, that means you should be spending less than $28,000 a year on your housing expenses. And the real reason behind that is because a lot of people buy too much house or they buy too much apartment. In fact, the average American home has tripled in size over the last 50 years. Do you really need that much house? If you're able to live in a smaller place, that saves you more money, not just on rent, but also on heating, on cleaning costs, on cooling costs. So a lot of things go into it. And then in turn, you can use that saved money and invest it or pay off debt, for example. If you really want to buy a house or rent an apartment, there are ways that you can lower your cost. So first of all is getting a roommate. Roommates can really cut your costs in half, literally. The next thing is actually looking at your credit score. You want to make sure you have a good credit score. And by good, I probably mean 700 or above, because a good credit score can actually help you access lower interest rates, especially if you're buying a house and you need a mortgage. Good credit score can lower your interest rate, which can really save you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars down the road. Another strategy to lower your housing costs is actually giving a low ball offer to the seller. I did this when I bought my first house. Instead of giving them an offer that was about $10,000 less than the original asking price, my offer was actually $60,000 less than the original asking price. But that was the anchor. From that $60,000 lowball offer, we kind of worked together and negotiated to a price that I actually was willing to pay. Another example to lower housing costs is actually buying during a market decline. For example, if you were in the 2008 Great Recession, that would have been a great time to buy. House prices have increased in value over the last several years. So maybe right now might not be the best time to buy a house. But if you are thinking of buying a house in the next 5 years or so, there might be a slight housing market correction. Of course, interest rates are very high in America. That's probably going to cause some home buyers to shy away from getting a mortgage that's so expensive versus where it was a few years ago at 2-3% for a 30-year mortgage. Another way that you can lower your housing costs is actually giving a 20% down payment. If you don't pay a 20% down payment. You don't need to pay a 20% down payment, but it does save you money over the long run. The next rule of thumb talks about total monthly consumer debt. Total monthly consumer debt takes into account your credit lines, your cash advances, and your credit cards. That's typically consumer debt. And in general, you want to be spending less than 20% of your net monthly income. Net essentially means anything after taxes. Let's say you make $100,000 a year, but that's before taxes. Let's say after taxes, you're maybe taking home $80,000. According to this rule, of the $80,000 after taxes, you really can only spend less than 20% of that net income, which means you're really limited to spending $16,000 on consumer debt payments. If you're struggling with spending money, especially on consumer debt, there are several strategies you can do. First is simply cutting up your credit cards. Literally, you take the scissors in your one hand, you take your credit card in the other hand and you cut them up. Don't use credit cards anymore and instead live on an all-cash budget. If it takes you $500 per week to live for basic living expenses like groceries or utility payments, etc., then my suggestion would be consider taking out $500 per week from your ATM or from your bank account and put it in an envelope, and you get to spend that $500. But once that envelope is empty, you can't spend anything else. The next example talks about total monthly debt payments. Total monthly debt payments really comes down to a wide variety of things like car debt, mortgage debt, credit card debt, student loan. And the answer is it should be less than 36% of your gross income. Again, let's say you're making $100,000 a year. That means you should be spending less than 36% or less than $36,000 of your income. And the real reason behind this thought process is so you don't get saddled in bad debt. So how can you start cutting down on your debt payments? Honestly, it's pretty easy with a budget. I think a budget does a great job because it really lists out where you are spending and saving money. And really, if you find yourself spending money on non-essential items like restaurants, like extra mall shopping or vacations or anything like that, those are areas that you can start cutting out. Maybe it just means instead of going to the restaurant 7 times a week, you're only going once a week. Another way to try to cut your debt is either through the snowball method or the avalanche method. The snowball method is essentially paying off the smallest balance on your credit cards first while continuing to make minimum monthly payments on the other cards. The avalanche method, on the other hand, is making the payments on the highest interest rate first while making the minimum payments on the other cards. So you really want to kind of figure out your way, your plan of attack, and depending on your mindset, right? If you want to tackle the smallest debt first, then do that. Or if you want to save more money by tackling and really trying to pay off the credit card with the highest interest rate first, then the avalanche method might be the best for you. The next point is actually talking about how much should you be saving and investing for retirement. Many people might tell you 5%, 10%, 15%, but honestly, my mindset is that it should be at minimum 20%. And especially for those of us who are in our 20s or 30s, chances are Social Security won't be around for us at that time. The chances are pretty low. What that means is it really all comes down to you and how much you save right now. Saving 5 or 10% probably won't be enough at this point, especially with inflation and cost of living continuing to increase. So my suggestion is starting at 20% bare minimum and trying to increase that savings rate as your income increases as well. There are several ways you can start to ensure that you are saving that much money. First is really automation. All you gotta do is set up an auto payment. Essentially, from your bank account or from your paycheck, you elect to automatically move $100, for example, into your 401k account, into your regular investment account, or maybe into your savings account every single month or whatever that is. You can also contribute to a 401k, making that employer matching contribution so you get access to your employer match. That's essentially free money. Another way you can start saving money is opening up a Roth IRA. Especially if you're young, Roth IRAs might be a good strategy for you because at age 59 and a half and after, that money is essentially tax-free. And finally, let's talk about the 50-30-20 rule. The 50-30-20 rule is essentially a simplified version of how you should be spending your money. It was invented in the early 2000s, and here's what it means. You should be spending about 50% of your income on needs. So in other words, whatever you need to live, like groceries, like rent, like car payments, whatever. 30% of your income should be spent on your wants. In other words, if you want to go out to restaurants, if you want to go out shopping in the mall or going on a vacation, that's where 30% of your income should be spent on. And then finally, 20% should be spent on your savings or your investments. and it is a way for you to help keep your spending in check. If you're struggling finding a best way to budget, then there are a couple of strategies that I would recommend. First is really figuring out your budget, and that could be just by Excel spreadsheet. That doesn't cost any money, but you need to be somewhat proficient in Excel. To be fair, it's not everyone's cup of tea, which is fine. There are other ways to keep track of your spending. Another way could be by downloading the app called Mint. Mint is free, at least the basic version, and it connects with your credit cards and your bank accounts to track your spending. Another budgeting app is called YNAB, or You Need a Budget. I have a link in the description below for YNAB that you can access. YNAB is a little bit more complicated than Mint. It does cost money, but it really helps you dig into your budget and the big picture. It's also visual, and it helps you better understand how you're spending money. The next step is I would suggest building a budgeting habit. A budget is actually something like a roadmap. It helps you get from point A all the way to point B, which is essentially financial independence or retirement or whatever your goal is. A budget helps you get there because without a budget, you'd really be lost. You don't know how much you're spending, how much you're making, where your money's going. That's what a budget does. Try to make it less intimidating. And here are some things that I personally have used. I tried to schedule a 30-minute time block on my calendar every Friday, at least when I first started budgeting. And I tried to make it a little bit more chill. So in other words, put on some music in the background, pour a glass of wine, just making it much less intimidating than sitting at a table and like really going through a spreadsheet. I tried to make it a little less scary. And that's what you should do too, every week for 30 minutes. It really does work. And the reason why is because it builds a budgeting habit. And from there, once you've built your budget, it's really time to start adjusting your spending and your savings habits. My personal preference is making everything automatic. Remember, when it's out of sight, it's also out of mind. It makes things a lot easier for you. And that's why I like auto investing, for example, or I like auto pay on my credit cards. I don't have to think about it because I have plenty of other stuff going on in my life, and at the same time, I make sure my credit card bill is paid, my credit score keeps going up, and my investments are made every single month, no matter what the stock market does. It's easy, and who doesn't like easy? After all, these are huge changes, and they can even cause a shock, and implementing them incorrectly can cause you to make mistakes, it could cause you to lose money, or they could even cause you to be demotivated in the long term. And one of the best ways to counter these mistakes and make sure they don't happen so you build long-term wealth is hiring a financial coach. If that's something you're interested in, then click the link below in the description to apply.